Hello, I'm back. Today I've got something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about time slips and glitch stories exclusively. So, I just wanted to mention a friend of mine's channel, Paranormal Rising, and if you're into these sort of stories, I recommend you visit his channel because he's got a huge collection of these and they're all really interesting stories, so go check that out. I'll leave a link down there. And what have we got today? First up, we've got a very interesting one, actually. It's kind of like a situation where a guy seems to have switched places with another alternative version of him. I'll read it. See what you think. Glitched to an alternative reality and back. Okay, so a few days back, I came downstairs to say good morning to my wife and leave for work. Nothing unusual there. I said to her, "Where are my car keys and wallet?" So here's the odd part. She said to me, "Don't be silly, you don't drive, and your wallet is on the dining room table." This kind of took me back a little, as I've been driving for more than 8 years, and she knew this. Then I looked at my wallet on the table, and it was a red leather wallet, which I don't own, with all of my cards and receipts in it. I have a black leather wallet. So, confused, I go into the kitchen to make myself a coffee, and not being happy about what I had just experienced and still in shock, I asked her again, and she said, "Your car keys are on the hook in the kitchen, and your wallet should be where you left it in your pants, as last night we had been out for dinner." I then went to look at the wallet on the table, the red one I think he means, and it wasn't there. It was upstairs like she said it would be, and it had gone back to the normal black leather wallet that I own. Also, I have noticed other small differences lately, like my clothes and shoes not being where I remember putting them, and then looking elsewhere and finding them in the same place they have always been. I've no clue what's happening. Am I going mad, possibly? And this next bit is the really interesting part of this story, because this is the same incident from the wife's perspective. Later, after not being able to forget about the incident, the gentleman confronted his wife and asked if she had been playing a prank on him. And he continues, "So I asked her outright, no messing about, if she was playing a prank that day. And what she said shook me up a little. She said that when I came downstairs that morning, I asked her where my wallet was and that I needed it to catch the bus. She then said, 'Why are you not driving?' Then apparently I said something like, 'Have you had a funny turn in the night, love? I don't drive,' which she obviously found to be a bizarre comment. And then she asked what I thought of the meal last night, and I just said, 'What meal?' Again, this was bizarre because, as I mentioned earlier, we had gone out for dinner the night before. Then when I came out of the kitchen, I asked where my car keys and wallet were, and it's at this point where our experiences matched up again." So what's happened here, I wonder? It seems to me like the consciousness has switched out. So the person who was in this reality, his consciousness has switched places with his double in another reality. That's the way it looks to me. I've come across this sort of report before. There was this Spanish lady who went to sleep one night and awoke the next day to a different reality, which was our reality. At first, when she first woke up, everything seemed the same except for her bed sheets. Then as the day progressed, she became distressed when she arrived at work. She had worked at the same company for 20 years, but now, in this reality, she worked in a different department of the company, which totally baffled her. Other things were exactly as she remembered. All of her identification and personal papers hadn't changed. Her apartment was the same as she remembered, apart from a few small details like different clothes. However, in this reality, she is now back with her ex-partner, a man she had broken up with over 6 months ago in her original universe. And the new boyfriend that she had in her old reality doesn't seem to exist at all in this reality. It's all pretty confusing stuff. There was also Robert Monroe, the famous astral traveller, who consciously possessed a man that he felt a very strong familiarity with in a strange alternative world. He experienced small portions of this man's life, which was very different in every way to this reality. But these two cases, the Spanish lady and Robert Monroe, involve the transfer of the observer's consciousness alone. A more commonly reported glitch or slip is where a person physically, or they seem to physically jump forward or backwards in time. And so, check out this story. Nutley Bridge time slip events. This is a true time slip story that happened to my son, 17, and my daughter, 19, at the time in 2014 in New Jersey. At this time, they were living in their mother, my ex, in Fairfield. Sorry, I said living in their mother. I meant living with their mother in Fairfield in New Jersey. And one day they were driving to visit me at my apartment in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, about 14 miles away. They took Route 46 to Route 3 to the Route 21 exit. I'll put this on a map, so hopefully it makes sense. My son was driving his 2002 Jeep Grand Cherokee. They had made this simple trip many times, and they were not drinking nor on any type of drugs. My daughter never even believed in anything paranormal at all before this. As they got off the Route 21 exit at around 5:30 p.m, which is rush hour, and waited to make a left to cross the Nutley Lyndhurst Bridge, the lights turned green, and so they turned, and were now headed west towards the bridge. Correction there, he's heading east. I think this guy's got his east and his west mixed up. I didn't realise until after I had recorded everything. Carry on. But as soon as the truck's front tyres hit the metal grating of the bridge, instantaneously, they immediately realised that they were now headed back in the complete opposite direction. West. Approximately 3 blocks away from the Nutley Bridge. They both looked at each other and stopped the truck in the middle of the 2-lane traffic. The cars behind began to beep in anger. They were totally befuddled and quickly pulled into the first lot they saw, which was a parking lot for a small park for baseball and soccer. They both said to each other, "What the hell just happened?" They knew that in a nanosecond they were somehow transported a few blocks away and moving in the opposite direction. They then got out and were utterly confused, when out of nowhere a man with a strong British accent asked if everything was okay. I assume since he noticed their total and sheer panic-stricken faces. They just told him that everything was fine because they knew he wouldn't believe them. They later thought that the British man just added to the strangeness, but at any rate, they said, "Let's just keep going to Dad's and tell him, because he will definitely believe us since he's into all of this stuff, all the paranormal stuff." They came straight over and burst in talking fast. I had to slow them down to understand what had happened. They kept repeating, "It's so unbelievable," but they told me the whole story. I absolutely believed them. The looks on their faces was one I have never seen before. They were completely horrified and really scared. I felt terrible and yet a tad jealous because this sort of thing has never happened to me before. My daughter distinctly said to me, "I cannot believe this happened to me because I've never believed in this kind of stuff until now." So immediately I took them back to the spot and we all tried to recreate exactly what they did, hoping that I could experience this too. But after several attempts, nothing unusual happens. So that one comes across as more of an apport than a time slip actually to me, because there's no actual shift in time. They're still in the same place. Oh, sorry, not the same place. They're in the same time, but they've switched to a different place. It's a slip in place rather than a slip in time. So apports are pretty interesting, actually. Usually it's just like you hear about it in seances and spiritual activity, but an apport generally it's just an object that just appears out of nowhere, and I assume it comes from it's an object that's disappeared in one place and then arrived in this place. But as I was reading this, I've come across a fair few seeming apports that are of live animals and people, like that one that we just read. I think I'm going to do a video on apports. It sounds boring, but I think it's pretty interesting myself. Anyway, let's continue here. I was taking my dog for a walk in an area with pine plantations. There are high voltage electricity towers at the beginning of the plantation, with a little track leading up to a hill next to the towers. Next to this track was a fire break, then the pine trees. At the bottom of the track was a wide dirt road used by trucks. There was also the same kind of road at the top of the hill. It was approximately 500 yards to the top of the hill. I walked with my dog up to the top of the hill, got to the dirt road on the top, and turned around to go back down. I could see my parked car clearly, as the track had a big open space around the towers. Next thing I know, my dog and I were walking through a little track surrounded by trees. The trees were not consistent with the pine. It took me a long time, walking lost along this track, before I made my way to a bitumen road, miles away from my car. This experience was very unnerving. I'm still not dealing with it very well. So there's another apport. That would be terrifying. Imagine that, just being teleported into the middle of a forest somewhere. This next one is more of a classic time slip. It was May 2005. I had returned to the UK after holidaying in Australia, with a suntan no doubt. I was living in Weymouth, Dorset, in southwest of the UK at the time, so I caught a late evening train from London, Waterloo, heading for Weymouth. The train stopped briefly at Bournemouth. Why is everything called mouth? The train stopped briefly at Bournemouth. I just realised it's probably pronounced Bournemouth and Weymouth. I'm sure I'm going to get corrected in the comments there. Please do correct me. The train stopped briefly at Bournemouth, where the front 4 coaches in which I was seated were detached from the main body of the train, and these 4 coaches then continued the journey to Weymouth. This was a journey I'd taken numerous times, so I was accustomed to the order of local stops along the remainder of the route. Poole, Hamworthy, Holton Heath, Wareham, Wool, Morton, Dorchester South, Upwey, and finally Weymouth. I would habitually tick them off in my head. The closer the train got to Weymouth, the fewer passengers remained on board. By Wareham, there was barely a handful left. As the train pulled into Wool, a young woman rose from her seat and stood next to the exit. The only reason I noticed her was that she was wearing a bright red jacket. Otherwise, she was dressed appropriately for this time period, so there was nothing really unusual about her at all. The train stopped, the doors opened, and she dismounted onto the platform. Momentarily the doors closed, and the train pulled away from the station. I turned to look out of the window, noting the solitary platform, and idly watched the young woman walk along it. I was still looking out the window when the train arrived at the next station. It was Wool again. I saw the platform name pass by. What? We had just stopped at Wool, barely a few minutes ago. I looked up, and there was the same young woman in the red jacket waiting by the doors. The train stopped, the doors opened, and she dismounted. I felt confused and disorientated. Had I been hallucinating after a long and tiring journey from the other side of the world? Anyway, the rest of that journey was uneventful, but ever since that day, whenever I passed through Wool, I pay close attention to the surroundings and the other passengers, hoping that I might experience something strange again. So yeah, there you go. That's your classic sort of time slip. And I've got no doubt that American listeners are going to have a go at me about the word disorientated. But in Britain and Australia and probably Ireland and I know New Zealand as well, all of us, we use the word disorientated. Disoriented is the US pronunciation. So back off, man. It was late one weeknight at around 1 or 2 a.m. and I was at this 4-way intersection with traffic lights, heading home from a friend's house. I sat there for what seemed like forever before the traffic light turned green. There were no cars anywhere in sight. I was looking intently because I was thinking about running the light because it was taking so long to change, and there was no one around. But with my history of traffic tickets, I decided to wait a couple more minutes. It finally turned green, so I went through the intersection. It was eerie how quiet everything was. When you pass through the intersection, you can see clearly down the road, both ways, as far as the eye can see, and everything was so still. No neighborhoods or stores or driveways nearby. But this is when it got weird. As soon as I'm through the intersection, I look in my rear view, and there is heavy traffic going crossways through the intersection. And that light is green, not my green light that should have still been on. I definitely had a WTF moment there. So this one's a little bit less clear because he doesn't have as many details, but it seems like he's jumped from, I would assume from early in the morning, from 1 or 2 a.m. like he said, and then instantly he's jumped backwards to a busier time. But unfortunately he either didn't look at his clock or he forgot to mention it to us. This one's a possible time slip into the future. I'm not sure what happened, but I've always joked that an alien abduction could explain it. I was a young kid, grade school age, and it was a hot summer night, and I was headed to bed. I remember sitting in bed and having this bad feeling. More than just a feeling. I knew something was coming to get me. Like a horrifying reoccurrence was about to happen again, that my body remembered, but my mind did not. I knew it was close. I was terrified beyond my wits, and had no idea of what. But it was going to get me, no matter what I did. I hadn't sat down on my bed for more than a few seconds, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. As soon as I sat down, I turned around slowly to scan my room, and it was the next morning. Just like that. I was still dressed and everything, still in mid-turn, except it was now the next day. 1 second I was terrified at night, and as I turned around, it was the next morning. I felt well rested, yet only a second, which I was fully awake for, had passed. I went downstairs and got on with my day. I told people what happened, and they just acted like I told them there was grass in the yard, like it was the most mundane thing ever. So I dropped it. So I find this one interesting because he's consciously aware of the slip as it happens, and he's aware of his surroundings changing instantaneously. He's aware of his physical state, from tiredness to fully rested within an instant, which is interesting in itself. But he thinks it's aliens, and I tend to think it's a time slip. It makes you wonder if these time slips just happen to all of us all the time and we don't even know it. But, yeah, what do you reckon? Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.